If I had to boil this passage from Luke's gospel down to just a few words, we might well summarize it with a statement like this. Why aren't you as incensed at the state of the world as I am? Can't you see that there is a crisis roiling the earth? Are you able to interpret what's going on around you without retreating into denial? It's not the Jesus we're accustomed to hearing preached in most mainline pulpits in the United States. Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Be not anxious about your life. Consider the lilies of the field, how they neither toil nor spin. Let the little children come unto me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's the Jesus most Christians know, at least the one they like to believe in. In his research on Christianity in the U.S., Christian Smith found that religion's primary job in the minds of most Americans is to make people good. Good people make life nicer for everyone and help society function better. We would prefer a don't mind me Jesus that we can come back to when it suits us, rather than one that disrupts our lives by turning it upside down or setting it on fire. And to be fair, fire can mean many things in the biblical text. The fire of purification and refinement, like in Malachi 3. See, I am sending my messenger to prepare the way, for he is like a refiner's fire, like a washer's soap, refiner and purifier of silver. It might sound something like, I came to bring God's refinement to the earth in all its corrupt places, and how I wish it was already kindled. All throughout the biblical text, God's very presence with people is made manifest in fire. The burning bush that causes Moses to turn aside. The pillar of fire that guided the people through the nighttime wilderness. The day of Pentecost as the Spirit descends on the faithful. I came to bring the palpable presence of God to the earth, and how I wish the earth was already ablaze with the divine. And if Jesus came to bring fire to the earth, then rising temperatures and lengthened wildfire seasons and rising ocean temperatures killing off oceanic life even in the dark depths is surely beating him to the punch. But fire is also a symbol of judgment in the Bible. The image even appears in the tradition of African American spirituals. The spirituals of enslaved Africans often evince these fiery petitions of justice and judgment on the wicked, the oppressor, the enslaver. In fact, any song or prayer uttered from the lips of those who hold an image of the divine as one upholding justice for the oppressed cannot call on the presence of the holy without simultaneously calling for the judgment on oppression, the slaying of the widow, the immigrant, the orphan. So listen for this next time you hear the spirituals or sing them. Sometimes it's subtle, but it's usually right there, like in the spiritual sung by the enslaved called Mary, Don't You Weep. One line from that spiritual was so powerful that it inspired the title of one of James Baldwin's greatest books. God gave Noah the rainbow sign. No more water. The fire next time. So what if we just accept that this Jesus in Luke's gospel is mad? And he's serious about it. My faculty dean at Luther Seminary, Rolf Jacobson, recently said of this passage, as long as we understand that Jesus' anger is directed at us. He said, I think a lot of people say, I like the mad Jesus who is mad at other people. The Jesus who is mad at other people is easy. Just open the paper, turn on the news, there it is, the other people. You're bound to be seen, or to see a scene like the one we saw this week when you think about Jesus mad at other people. When a 67-year-old man named David, living homeless in Washington, D.C., watched as crews tore down homeless encampments near the Kennedy Center and threw belongings into a garbage truck. And as he watched, David was quoting Matthew 25:40. As you have done to the least of these, you have done it unto me. And others showed up to the scene with signs that read, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, Proverbs 14:31. All amid the president's vow to clear the homeless from D.C. and federalize the D.C. Police Department and deploy the National Guard against citizens. They could well have stood there and chanted, I have come to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. You hypocrites. You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? But anger at us? We weren't there. We don't support such things. If we were near enough, we'd be there holding signs right alongside them. But perhaps we can hear Jesus' message differently, as it is echoed by Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, written to white moderate churches of his era, but no less timely for our own. King says, the contemporary church is often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are. But the real judgment of God, he says, is upon the church as never before. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of many, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club. Those words are both prophetic for our time and a prescient analysis of precisely what happened to the church in the U.S. since the 60s, all the way up to our present decades of congregational decline, during which mainline churches coddled all of the people that they think might come if we don't get too serious about anything, and in the process become a tepid little blob of nothingness, a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. If you are following the ways of Jesus, embodying the gospel in your everyday life, you will be led into taking sides with the vulnerable and the oppressed and the victims of the powerful. There is just no other option. No, I tell you, but rather division. And it's a daunting call when acts of solidarity are becoming more risky, and even ministries of compassion are being criminalized. Like when, during the George Floyd uprising, the protesters in Chicago became trapped when the bridges were raised and the public transit lines stopped, and they were being tear gassed and pepper sprayed by the police. And a group of young people fled to the Chicago Freedom School, where they showered off the pepper spray and tear gas and were given pizza to eat and fresh clothes to wear. Then the police showed up in riot gear with a city inspector, demanding to be let in to search for protesters, and the inspector issued a cease and desist order, claiming that they were feeding and housing young people without a license, threatening a fine of $500 to $1,000 a day and the arrest of the center's directors if they didn't stop giving people food and clothes and showers. And if you think these sorts of things aren't coming to churches like yours in the very near future, my friends, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? It's why we need the stories of our faith ancestors. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time, and it is very pressingly our time when the power of empire attempts to crush the most vulnerable among us and criminalize those who turn aside to help. It's why we need this litany from Hebrews and why we need to keep adding to that sacred litany. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish. And all those who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouth of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness. By faith, several members of a Catholic parish, gay and lesbian members, confessed to their priest their questions related to their own sexuality and faith. And the priest's response was, every week when they approached the altar rail for communion, he passed them over to serve the next person. By faith, those excluded from the table of grace mounted an audacious, faith-filled response, renting space in a hotel lounge with a makeshift altar constructed from cocktail tables, forming a new congregation. By faith, they called a priest named George Hyde to come and lead the congregation, taking the name the Eucharistic Catholic Church, a reminder of the sacrament once but never again denied them. By faith, it was the first time that a church was founded by gay and lesbian people as a place of belonging for queer folks. And the Eucharistic Catholic Church didn't get its start in New York or San Francisco or LA, but in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1946. And the Eucharistic Catholic Church not only provided the first explicitly welcoming religious space for queer worshipers, but they also broke with other exclusionary norms of their day, forming a racially integrated community of faith with both queer and straight members who transcended denominational divisions. This is how many of us queer folk have typically come to encounter the faith, through the message of condemnation that seeps into our awareness, even if we've never heard it all that directly from our churches and families. And despite all odds, many of us still persist in our faith practice, even when we have to do so alone, and even when we have to create entirely new churches or denominations to practice our faith. By faith, the people of the Eucharistic Catholic Church would not take no for an answer at the table of God's grace. By faith, the Reverend George Hyde came to serve a people who were refused service by the so-called servants of God. By faith, people like you, Crescent Hill Baptist Church, you have so many ways to finish that sentence. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The writer of Hebrews also says, others were tortured. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment, stoned to death, sawn in two, killed by the sword, destitute, persecuted, tormented. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. those stories of our faith ancestors deserve a continued telling too. We don't leave them behind in the long journey of faith. Those who didn't make it here with us here need to be brought here with us by keeping their stories alive in the community of faith. Because a lot of people, including a lot of queer and trans people, can read passages like this one and see our own ancestors in the faith. That is, if we even know the stories of our ancestors in the faith. It's becoming more and more difficult to hang on to these stories and pass them along. Enforced forgetting is a tool of oppression. One such story that is very hard to recount took place on Sunday evening, June 24th, 1973, in the French Quarter of New Orleans at the Upstairs Lounge. Has anyone here heard of the Upstairs Lounge? One person. Good. I'm glad to share this story with you. Historian Jim Downs says that the Upstairs Lounge was sandwiched between Imani's bar on the first floor and a flop house on the third floor at a street corner that had long been the province of hustlers and those prowling to pay for sex, which sounds to me like the kind of place that Jesus would have gathered with people. By 7:30 p.m. every Sunday evening at the Upstairs Lounge, the party ended, and those who were a part of the congregation that met there moved to the middle room, and they began singing songs of worship around the bar's white baby grand piano, transforming it from a bar into a church, the New Orleans chapter of the Metropolitan Community Church. The main door was locked during the service to protect those inside, and on this particular evening in 1973, while they were singing songs of worship and solidarity, an unknown individual or perhaps group doused the entrance to the stairwell and the drapes downstairs in lighter fluid and set fire to the building with a Molotov cocktail, sending flames quickly spreading around the room, across the floor, over the ceiling. Because gay establishments of this era were so prone to attack and vandalism, metal bars and boards were installed over the windows to protect those inside. A few were able to make it out through the thick smoke and flames. Some were thin enough to squeeze themselves through the bars covering the windows, to jump the 2 stories down to the pavement beneath. But by the time the fire department arrived, it was too late to save anyone else, and 32 people were dead. Bodies melted together in a pile on the floor. 2 brothers and their mother who came with them to worship that evening, lovers and husbands and friends. The pastor of the congregation stuck halfway out a window trying to escape when he caught fire and was mercifully killed by a falling air conditioner unit from the floor above. A third of the church's membership was lost in that fire. And many of the men had no family or friends who could identify their bodies, and they remain among the anonymous dead in our litany of the faithful. Others, including the pastor, had families who refused to receive their remains when they discovered that they were gay, and they were buried in the city's potter's field. It was, of course, an arson of a church. Yet the national press would later call the people gathered in worship there lascivious and lewd. Downs says the Upstairs Lounge was not just a homosexual hangout that was frequented even by thieves, as the mainstream press put it, but a place that also served as a community center, a theater, and a place of worship. This was the deadliest massacre of gay people in U.S. history, all the way up until the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando in June 2016 that killed 49 and wounded another 53. MCC founder Troy Perry said of those who died in the Upstairs Lounge, these were spiritually minded people. They were driven by their faith, and they had turned a Sunday afternoon beer bust into a chance to gather as a religious community. May their story go with us, strengthen us, become a part of us, be told among us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, rather division. Decide which side you are on, and what you will risk to stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable among us. You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Look around you. The peace of an unjust status quo must be disturbed, and you are God's beloved disturbers of that peace.